Here's a thought problem. If you wanted to reduce the overall rate of binge drinking by high school seniors in your community, should you focus your prevention efforts on those at greatest risk of binge drinking, in other words, use selective prevention, or on the general population, use universal prevention? The answer to this question has been called the prevention paradox. Let's see how it works. We know risk factors are important predictors of binge drinking, and we've been following a group of 808 diverse Seattle Public School students since they were 10. We can use that sample to identify 18-year-olds at low to high risk of binge drinking based on their exposure to risks from age 12 to age 18 reported on annual surveys. Let's look in each domain of risk and count whether each student reported exposure to either a general risk, like community disorganization in the community domain, or a drug-related risk in that domain, like community norms favorable toward drug use, from the time they were 12 to the time they were 18. We can count the number of risk factors, 2 possible per domain, across all 4 domains: community, school, family, individual, and peer, for a total possible score of 0 to 8 risk factors for each 18-year-old in the Seattle Social Development sample. So let's look at 4 risk groups. First, 18-year-olds exposed to only 0 or 1 risk factor. That's just over 50% of the 18-year-olds in the sample. Next, how many 18-year-olds report exposure to 2 to 4 risks? That's 37% of the 18-year-olds. 9.5% of the sample reported exposure to 5 or 6 risk factors, and only 3.3% of the sample reported exposure to 7 or 8 risk factors. To keep it simple, let's put together those exposed to 0 to 4 risk factors into a low-risk group, and those exposed to 5 to 8 risk factors into a group we'll call the high-risk group. In this sample, just over 87% are low risk, and 12.8% are at high risk for binge drinking. Does risk matter? You bet it does. Only 21% of those at low risk reported current binge drinking at age 18. That's about 1 in 5. But fully half of those in the high-risk group reported binge drinking. Clearly, that group needs preventive intervention to reduce their level of risk. We should not ignore those at high risk. But what if we focused our prevention work only on that highest risk group? How much binge drinking could we prevent in the population? About 25% of the 18-year-olds reported current binge drinking in this sample. But look, only about a quarter of those binge drinkers, 6.4% of the total population, come from the high-risk group. And about 3/4 of the 18-year-old binge drinkers, 18.8% of the total population, actually come from the low-risk group. Rose's theorem explains why. A large number of people exposed to a small risk may generate many more cases than a small number exposed to high risk. If we want to significantly prevent binge drinking among 18-year-olds community-wide, it doesn't make sense to ignore the people who will make up 3/4 of the binge drinkers, even if they are at low risk. We don't know in advance which of those people will become binge drinkers. This means we need to use universal prevention in our communities to reduce the most widespread risks community-wide, because those risk factors affect the largest numbers of youth in both the low and high-risk groups, and therefore will have the greatest overall effect. That's the lesson of the prevention paradox.